Hi everyone, I'm your host Stephen, and welcome to another episode of the Bamboo History Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something very important to all of us that the Chinese invented a long time ago, and that, my friends, is paper. We use paper for a lot of things, as you may already know. We use it to write on, we use it to read on, and we use it to make paper aeroplanes. I know we have things like computers and Kindle and all that jazz these days, but paper still remains an integral part of our lives. In fact, I've got a piece of paper right in front of me with my notes of this podcast. Paper was invented by a person who was called Cai Lun, or Cai Lun, who lived in China around 2,000 years ago. Back then, China wasn't called China. It was called the Han Dynasty, and it was an empire that coexisted for a while with the Roman Empire, and was around the same size as the Roman Empire as well. So yeah, the Han Dynasty was a pretty great country at the time. Cai Lun was a eunuch working for the Han Dynasty emperor in the palace at the time. For those of you who don't know what a eunuch is, they were the servants of the emperor who were castrated. In other words, they had their balls and penis cut off. Ouch. Now, before paper was invented, Chinese people at the time primarily used silk and bamboo to write on. The problem was silk was very expensive and was only reserved for very important documents. So prior to paper, the main form of medium to write on was with bamboo in the form of bamboo strips. So how it worked was bamboo was cut into long, thin, rectangular strips, and a single line of text would be written on that one strip. So for an entire book, for instance, it would mean multiple strips of bamboo sewn together. In Chinese, this is called jiandu, which means bamboo strips and wooden slips. These strips ranged from 15 centimeters long up to 1 meters long. So imagine having books made out of tens, hundreds, and maybe thousands of wooden bamboo strips. It would have been heavy as fuck. And that, unfortunately, was Big C, or Cai Lun's job, on a fateful day in the palace in the year 105, wheeling a load of bamboo books on a cart to store them somewhere. The story goes that his cart was loaded with so many of these bamboo strip books. The cart gave away because it was so heavy, and it toppled, sending all of these books onto the ground, and basically ruining them. Cai Lun was so frustrated, he was thinking at the time, far out, these wooden books are so bloody heavy. But instead of thinking, oh, that means I gotta hit the gym and get big, he decided to see if he could create some new material that these books can be written on. So Cai Lun, my man Big C, got to work. First, he decided to get bark from mulberry trees, some hemp rags, some pieces of cloth and old fishing nets, and try and mix them together. Then he combined all of these materials with water as well, and he started pounding them with a huge wooden tool. After that, he poured the mixture that was remaining into a massive sieve to drain the water out. What remained were fibers which could be used to write on. If you want to see visually what it looked like, there's a cool video on YouTube by a YouTuber called Li Ziqi, Liziqi, that shows her making paper the original way Big C made it in. So anyway, Cai Lun submitted this process to the emperor, stating that this material was easy to make, it was cheap, and it was lightweight. The emperor was so impressed, and Big C's new invention made him famous throughout the empire. Paper-making techniques obviously developed over time after Big C, as I highly doubt reflex white A4 copy paper was the same material as what he created back in the year 105. But paper-making techniques were kept secret by the Chinese for hundreds of years, and it was first spread to Korea and then to Japan by the year 610, so that's a long way from the year 105. Paper-making techniques was apparently taken to the Middle East when Arab soldiers captured Chinese papermakers who were part of a Chinese army that got defeated by the Arabs in the Battle of Talis in the year 751. It's actually an exciting piece of history that I want to cover in a later episode as well, the Battle of Talis. From the Middle East, then, it obviously spread into Europe, and the rest is history. Anyway, now you know about the origins of paper and how it came to be. But before I go, I wanted to share with you two things. Firstly, official historiography attributes Cai Lun, my man Big C, as the inventor of paper. But recent archaeological excavations have shown that maybe, just maybe, paper, or something similar to paper, was actually already being used. A paper fragment was excavated in northwestern China, which looked like part of a military map and was dated around 179 to 141 BCE, over 100 years ago before Big C's paper. Secondly, a few of our listeners might be wondering, what the heck happened to Big C? Well, it was later made a marquis in the year 114. A marquis is, a nobility title. But when the old emperor, the emperor that praised him for his papermaking techniques, died, the new emperor wanted Big C to answer for his apparent role in the death of his grandmother. And not wanting to face the shame of being potentially branded a criminal, he committed suicide in the year 121. So yeah, Cai Lun came to a very sad ending. But he's still being remembered for his invention of paper, and is in fact one of the few Chinese inventions where an individual has been attributed for its invention. A lot of other inventions made by the Chinese, we don't even know who invented them specifically. Hundreds of years later, during the Tang dynasty, Cai Lun was deified and he literally became a god. See, this is what Chinese people do. In other countries, you are simply remembered, but in China, you literally become a bloody god. And apparently he had his image being painted or imprinted onto paper mills and paper shops all over China, and even in Japan. Today there is a temple in his birthplace commemorating him, and many roads in China are named after him. If he was alive today, he would have endorsed Reflex paper, or maybe even be the ambassador for Dunder Mifflin. For those of you who've watched The Office, you'll get this reference. So now, a quick recap for any listeners who fell asleep during the podcast. 1. Paper was invented in China in the year 105, 2,000 years ago, by a man named Cai Lun. 2. He invented paper by combining tree bark, hemp, cloth, and fishing nets, then mixed it with water to create a paste, before straining the water out and creating fibers that could be written on. 3. The existing ways of writing before paper were on silk and bamboo. Cai Lun invented paper because he thought silk was too expensive to use all the time, and bamboo was just too heavy. If any of our listeners have any comments or feedback on this episode, please contact us via our email, which is in the show notes below. I really look forward to hearing what you all have to say. So there you go, folks. That is the story of the invention of one of China's great inventions, paper. I hope you enjoyed my content, and I look to see you around in our next episode. Bye.